I would like to share with you a secret today. And it's not my secret, it's actually his secret. But before we get into that, my name is Daniel Hyers, and I'm an activist and social entrepreneur, and I've been working on the climate crisis for over a decade. I've invented artivist protests in Berlin. I've built a movement of social innovation workshops all around the globe, and I've worked as a consultant for social enterprises as well as with UN Environment across the Mediterranean area. And one of my open secrets, or at least something that doesn't seem so obvious, is that the only passport that I own is actually from Germany. I grew up with a German mom and an American dad, and so I found the secret particularly interesting because it included some German philosophers. So this man is Thomas Björkman. He's a Swedish entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, businessman, and philanthropist. And he wrote a book about his secret. So I feel very comfortable that he doesn't want this to stay secret and that I can actually share this with you. And he wrote a book called The Nordic Secret. And the reason why he wrote it was that he was wondering, why is Swedish society developed so differently over the last 50, 80, 100 years than other parts of Europe and even the Anglo-Saxon Western world? And what he found that by the end of the 19th century, inspired by German philosophers, Swedish intellectuals were just convinced about the role of Bildung, or today we'd call it adult development, as a key to social development. And what they did was they created almost 100 centers all around Scandinavia, often in nature, where adults could spend 6 months for free and work on their inner development. And he argues that by the time the Industrial Revolution came to Scandinavia, around 10% of Swedish population had been to one of those places, and that this is the reason that Sweden and Norway and Denmark developed very differently from other parts of Europe and also from the English-speaking world. And I find that really fascinating, especially given the many crises that we face today. Because I think the problem, it seems, is not that we do not have the solutions or we don't know what needs to happen or we don't have the technology. But as Otto Scharmer says, there is a knowing-doing gap, that we are simply not capable with the institutions that are governing us today and the systems that we have in place to make the decisions and move the energy and the resources towards what we know needs to happen. And this is an environment in which the inner development goals were born. Because in the same way that the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are giving a language to a complex field of sustainable development and puts concepts into discrete little boxes, while we all know that reality is much more complex and much more interconnected than that. This gives us a language. It helps us make meaning, and it helps us communicate and talk with others about the goals that we really care about. And this is what the IDGs are doing, because the inquiry into the IDGs started with a simple question of what are the skills and qualities that we need to support a movement towards sustainable development. And we got over 1,000 responses. And with a group of academics, we put them into 23 IDGs along 5 dimensions. And this is the framework right here. And this has resonated with people all over the world. And so when we went into our second phase to ask, what are the tools that we can use to develop these skills? We got over 4,000 people who participated in this. And again, we went with a group of scientists to go through all of these methods on how these skills can be learned and developed and put them into a toolkit. And currently, there's around 20-something methods in this toolkit. We're going to launch it on December 15. I'm going to put an invitation below. But this is just the start. We put this on an open source framework, and we would like everyone around the world to have input or to provide their input into this toolkit on what are the methods that they are using that are working to do inner development. And finally, we are starting into the third phase of our project. We want to take this global. We realize we have a lot of biases in this framework, a Western bias, a Scandinavian bias, especially in our work with, for example, the government of Rwanda, who asked us, so where is forgiveness in your model? Because we have a lot of development on forgiveness that we can talk about. And we realize that there's probably a lot more categories that we need to be considering if we're talking about this as a global framework for all of society. And so as we go on this next 2 years, we want to get input from all corners of the planet. And this will probably make our framework evolve. We will see maybe even some categories change, but this is the journey that we are on. And before I end, I would like to make one final comment. Inner development or personal development, that does not mean the individual. On the contrary, we believe that this cannot stay in the private corner, relegated to a spot sometime after work and maybe even after dinner. But this needs to be center stage and discussed in the workplace, in our social networks, in our political institutions, pretty much in all the places that shape our world as it is today. And this is why we are working with government, we're working with companies, we're working with large organizations in order to bring inner development work to a significant part of the global population. Maybe we'll even get to 10%. Because we believe that this will significantly increase our chances of reaching ambitious goals on complex challenges like sustainable development. If you would like to be part of this, we have hubs all over the world, and you can get engaged locally, or I would like to invite you to Stockholm in October next year, where we are celebrating the IDG Summit and bringing together practitioners, academics, artists, and everyone who is interested in how we can use the power of inner development for sustainable development on our planet. So thank you very much for having me with you. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere in our network.